Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back for another episode of Biohacking Superhuman Performance. I'm Natalie Nidham, and I'm a holistic nutritionist. I'm an Puron epigenetic coach, and I'm a human potential coach. And I'm fascinated by biohacking, peptides, and all these different technologies and lifestyle hacks that we can use to make our lives better and make ourselves healthier. And today, I'm so excited to be here with Andrew LaTour, who's a guy that I've read stuff from for a long time and heard about and seen floating in the groups. So I was super stoked when he agreed to be interviewed by me today. Andrew, if you don't already know, is the owner and founder of GembaRed, which is a company that produces red and near infrared light panels, which is what we're talking about today. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering and has worked in several industries, including alternative energies, specialty chemicals, and 3D printing. Someday we're going to have to talk about 3D printing because I so don't get that. Like how planes fly, I don't know. He's been a biohacker and a researcher for over 5 years. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the first question I need to ask you is, of all the biohacks you would have researched, why this? Why did you pick red light and near infrared light? Like what?
Yeah,
why
I mean,
this?
yeah,
Let's just get to the heart of the matter here.
Of course, yeah. No, I mean that's like really what really drew me in. Like red has always been my favorite color, and it's you've never explained why until you start to dive into the research, and it's like maybe it's this critical component that I've needed all my life and never had. And one of the things is, I got into biohacking, just about 5 years ago. I was obese. I was pretty much pre-diabetic, and going through a lot. And I started doing the bulletproof diet and low carb, keto, all these things, supplements. I was adding all these things, researching different protocols, and really getting into it. But what that kind of showed me was I needed to also focus on like my sleep, and how am I going to tackle stress and sleep and work and circadian rhythms. And so I started doing more, getting out in sunlight and wearing blue blockers at night, and just really taking care of my sleep environment, shedding all the blinds. And then I heard Dave Asprey and some of these other folks talk about red light therapy, and how, hey, yeah, you can get a cheap heat lamp or a cheap LED lights and start to use those around. I was like, yeah, this is great. So I started with a heat lamp, and I use it a lot of times just on my lower back because I was getting a lot of low back pain while I was working, and I was driving a lot. And so I'd use it on my lower back, and it would feel great to kind of relax
so it. Actually helped.
Oh yeah. And I had been using kind of the far infrared biomat for a while. So it's the far infrared rays. Like, again, it's more of a heating purpose and
okay.
Relaxing, and can help with sweat and things like that. And so I was using a lot. The heat bulbs are great. They're 250 watt. They get really hot, and I was in so much pain. I would put it so close to my back that it was nearly burning. And so like it was a really to me, it was a kind of an inefficient way of doing that. A lot of times people will ask, like, what's the difference between far infrared or heat lamps versus LED devices? And, that's one of the big things. It's the heat effects, the thermal effects. So, when I started to research LED devices, and you and I probably were introduced to a lot of these LED devices at the same time at the Bulletproof Biohacking Conference, like the 2015 and 2016 ones.
Yeah. That was when I became a bulletproof coach. So
yeah, they did the bulletproof training, and I was a volunteer at the time. So I was.
No kidding. Our paths probably crossed at that
time.
I
was serving you coffee, and you didn't even know.
I was pounding the bulletproof coffee in those days.
No, it was great. Yeah, it was delicious. So I got introduced to these, LED panels that companies were starting to come out with, and they were certainly more affordable than, a high clinical grade laser that's a couple $1,000s. But we're seeing LED panels, 5 years ago were $600, $800, and we're like, as an engineer, I was looking at them, I was like, why are we why are we spending so much money on LED panels? I was like, you know, my brother used to go to the Radio Shack and buy LEDs and string up his own little DIY lights and jars and things. And I was like, this was not making sense for me.
So let me
And
ask you a question. Sorry, let me just stop you there and
yeah,
ask
go
you.
for it.
When you were using that heat lamp on your back, was it
Mhm.
just the heat that was giving you the benefit, do you think, or was there anything? Did those lamps at all deliver any kind of the wavelengths that we know are, because there's
Yeah,
very specific wavelengths that really deliver any degree of therapeutic benefits, right? So
yeah, and that's the key. Is like, you know, if we can get kind of talking about, you know, the wavelengths, and we talk about different wavelengths of light, and usually we talk about it in terms of nanometers.
yeah,
Just an introduction for folks who don't know, like we talk about in nanometers. So starting at 600 nanometers is when you get into the red wavelengths, and below that, you know, you've got blue, which is around, you know, the 400s,
yeah,
and then below that is UV. So like, you know, the 300s is the UV. And so red wavelengths are longer, you know, the longest in the visible spectrum.
okay,
And then you move into near infrared, which is invisible, but there are even longer wavelengths. And then you can have mid infrared, far infrared. The infrared range is a pretty big kind of spectrum, and that's why they break it up into, you know, near, mid,
yeah,
and far. Um, so with the heat lamps, that emits, you know, you know, there's some debate about how much it emits. It depends on the brand of the lamp and how they make it. But you know, let's say it emits about I want to say like 14% in the red to the near infrared
oh, no,
region.
I mean, it's not
And
nothing.
yeah, so it is, you know, it's a measurable portion, and you can look up the spec sheets. You can find the specification sheets for the Philips lamps, and you know, all these GE makes lamps, and you can find their spec sheets, and you can see how, you know, what the percentage is, and they measure it all pretty well. So there is a portion of that that's of, you know, would be relevant to the photobiomodulation kind of studies, right?
Yeah,
Because photobiomodulation, we look for, you know, about usually 600 to 900 nanometers from red to near infrared. And because that's the optical window
mm-hmm.
to get that penetration into the skin as well, it helps kind of activate the mechanisms that we can talk about for red light therapy.
Yep,
And so the problem is that photobiomodulation is pretty much exclusive of any heat effects. So they don't want to mix the mechanisms of light with the mechanisms of heat, because heat, you know, creates its own new kind of spectrum of heat shock proteins and
yeah,
you know, all these great things. That's why far infrared saunas are so popular, and why heat lamps are so popular. But it kind of starts to muddle everything. So it's hard to say, okay, well, did you get the benefit from the red light, or did you get it from the heat? So, and at the proximity I was using, it was definitely the all
all
heat,
heat.
you know, because I was holding it like a couple inches away, and like, so it's definitely all heat, just kind of relaxing the muscle, heating up the muscle, um, you know, to try to negate that, you know, perhaps, you know. And I was just refreshing on some studies. They can use a heat lamp, you know, further away with some airflow to keep your skin cool, and they also water filter some of these heat lamps, so that if you put water, that absorbs a lot of the different near infrared. It helps simulate the water absorption from the sun through the atmosphere. So they called water filtered IRA,
So how do you do
infrared
that?
A.
You you put you wet the
Usually,
skin, or you actually, because you're not going to put the lamp.
yeah, you would have kind of, you know, some sort of container full of water in between you and
Oh, literally. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, medical devices make it this way. I haven't seen any consumer grade devices do this, but it's a
Well,
really
if you had, like,
interesting.
I guess if you had an aquarium,
Yeah, exactly. Like I could
your little
like
red.
make some thin plexiglass and fill it with water and do
Yeah.
that, but like that's a lot of effort for, you know, you might as well, you know, a lot of people use infrared heat lamps, and they get great benefits. So it's not like you have to add that in, but that's always like an interesting facet, that in the studies they do study it with that water barrier to help filter out some of the infrared and reduce the heat. So it's an interesting prospect. So anyway, so that's a
Anyway, so you were using
long-winded answer. Yeah,
well, and really getting your biggest bang from the heat.
yeah, Yeah, I believe so. And so that's why it was kind of like, that, it was great for what I have. It's only $30. You can get a heat lamp and a little holder for it for about $30 on Amazon, easily obtained. And that's a good way to start, as long as you're kind of cautious enough with it, with the heat aspect of it. So anyway, so back to kind of the conference and stuff, I kind of held off. And, as an engineer and as grown up in this technology age, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll wait a couple years. And because typically technology, when it's first introduced, is very expensive. And
Yeah.
then there's kind of an exponential curve, where, prices go down, like computers and phones and things like that, prices go
Competitors
down.
come into the market too, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
really two people. I only remember two panels at that conference. Maybe there was a third, but
yeah. No, and and then the conference, they started to get more and more panels and things like that as years progressed. But I was still, even a year or so later, I was still like, I didn't see any competition for that, and I still really wanted it for myself. So I was like, at the time, I was living in China, and
how convenient.
I was walking around, and I saw a commercial. Actually, I saw a commercial from where where I was staying in China, and it was like, "Oh, come into our doctor's office. We have this tiny little square of LED lights, and you can come visit your doctor and pay $500 per visit, and they can help you with your arthritis for this little LED square."
Come on.
When and that, just that day, I was walking around these electronics markets and tripping over bags of LEDs, and like literally, like, it's just stacked up everywhere. And I could buy whole rolls of LEDs for $10. And I was like, there's something really wrong. So I started, trying to seek out designing and manufacturing it myself, and work with different companies, and finally just took the plunge and said, okay, I'm going to put something out there. And there was a lot of need in the biohacking community for a more affordable alternative. So that was, one of the big things, make it more affordable. But I also saw there was a lack of measurements and science behind like what they were putting out with. So, as a chemical engineer, and I've worked in like really high end process, manufacturing environments, I know measuring something is more important than the product itself. Because if you don't know the proper measurements, you don't know how to use it, you can't use it safely. And so I was pretty much the first company not only to slash the prices, but also to get third-party testing on irradiance, on wavelengths, on flicker, and make that all transparent, on my website. And the problem is that the numbers that my lab got were actually a lot lower than what my competitors were advertising, because they were using improper measurement techniques. They use a cheap solar power meter that they find online, and that inflates the measurement by 2 or 3 times. And I've written blog posts about this, that I bought basically every solar power meter I could find on the market. There's like 5 of them, and you can see some companies even show the measurement they're holding in their hand, and they say, oh, look, we get 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 6 inches, but they're using a cheap solar power meter that reads falsely high because it's not meant to measure these specific wavelengths. And so it's not calibrated right, essentially. So it gives people a false impression. It gives them a false impression of how effective that the device is going to be when you buy it. And like when you compare it to GembaRed, which it seems like we're advertising low power things, but it's actually just we measure it the right way. It's been a tough kind of re-educating people to let's look at the real numbers and the science, so we can all be on the same page.
Right. So basically, the GembaRed, if we were going to look at it comparing apples to apples without having the right meter in front of us, let's say, the GembaRed would appear to be lower powered than the other units.
I mean,
it would state on their spec sheets and website.
Right. And some of my panels are lower wattage overall. We do consume lower power. So even if you measured it apples to apples, something like a Juve is more powerful than my standard unit, like the Groove. So if you measure apples to apples, my competitors are higher power. And also another aspect of what I'm educating is that you don't necessarily need all that power that companies are
Right.
saying. You know, there's kind of a biphasic dose response. There's kind of a, you know, our cells are very happy when they get red light therapy, and so you know, you don't have to have too much. And you know, there's kind of been a lot of marketing over, oh, you need all this intensity because you can have a really short high intensity thing and get all these
Right.
results.
And so
And
is that true? Like, so if you have less power, do you then just extend your treatment time, or is there a negative to kind of blasting yourselves with too much power in a short, like it's
yeah,
like exercise, right? Like
exactly.
you can be doing high intensity interval training for 20 minutes, and a lot of people would say that's way better than an hour of steady state exercise.
Right, right.
But, that doesn't mean that that's the way red light therapy works. So,
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's kind of, you can think about it as exercise. You can do a high intensity interval and do that, you know, every other day, or at a good pace. So it's the same thing with red light therapy. Like if you want to do a high intensity thing, maybe you need to space it out over the course of a couple days, so you don't do it. You know, some companies say, oh, you can do it twice a day,
mhm,
no problems, but all these are really big generalizations, you know.
right.
And so you can, yeah, so if you have a lower power product, you can extend the time and get the equivalent kind of dose, but that doesn't always mean, you know, they kind of, some of the studies are basically saying that if you have two different intensities and you normalize for the dose, which is the joules, you might still get slightly different results, especially if you have a very high intensity product that, you know, the intensity part is part of the biphasic dose. Your body is acclimated to the sunlight, and, you know, acclimated to a certain amount of energy at a certain rate. And basically, you know, one of the studies I was reading from Dr. Hamblin is called Infrared and Skin, Friend or Foe. That's one of my favorites. And he says, you know, if you're having a product that's in excess of the sunlight, 2 or 3 times the intensity of the sunlight, then that's something you have to start worrying about in terms of degradation, of causing too much reactive oxygen species, of
Yeah.
reversing kind of what the benefits are of red light therapy. So I've always been more of a proponent on staying the lower side of the intensity spectrum, and kind of, you know, slowly building it up over time.
Mhm.
And you know, that's always been kind of more my platform, of being more
Okay.
lower and slower, and giving yourself more time, because a lot of studies are done over the course of weeks or the course of months, so there's no need to kind of like, and you're going to own your own device, you know, you're going to have it for
Yeah, no, you
years.
can. So
And yeah.
explain to us what's biphasic dose. You've mentioned it a few
Oh yeah.
times. So just
Mhm.
in case people don't know what that means, can you
Yeah.
just explain quickly what biphasic, what you mean when you're saying biphasic?
Yeah, so basically it means, there's kind of a sweet spot of getting just the right amount of intensity, of just the right amount of dosage for your red light. So typically when you dose the red light, you're going to say, okay, you have X amount of intensity, and you're going to do it for X amount of time. So
Right.
let's say a typical dose is 10 minutes,
Hmm.
and you know, you're shooting for 8 joules per dose. And
Okay.
I kind of have some calculators on my website to help you kind of figure out
Right.
the numbers. And so basically, uh, that maybe that's an ideal dose. And again, it's all depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to treat. Um, but let's say you triple that dose or you quadruple that dose in one day, that doesn't mean you're going to get that benefit faster,
Sure.
or more. You know, if you're trying to improve like your skin tone, or you're trying to
Hmm.
improve your energy levels or something like that, just because you do it for an extra, you know, oh, I'm going to triple my dose today, and because I want to really get a better response, it doesn't always work that way. Like, and it just kind of makes sense. You're not going to triple a sauna session and
No.
necessarily get a better result. You're not going to triple your exercise protocol and get a better result. The same thing kind of goes for red light therapy. So you do want to take it
And
kind of low and
there's
slow
a
and
time
see.
factor to this that you can't get away
Right.
from. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, excuse me
exactly.
just for 1 second. I'm listening.
Sure.
Be right back.
Okay.
Keep going.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so
Sorry,
basically,
my assistant, my dog, needs to get into the office.
oh, of course. So we're looking at, you know, obviously too little of a dose, either too little intensity yeah, you could have a very low intensity product and use it for an infinite amount of time and never get any response because it's so low of intensity. And usually that's like a dramatic, like it has to be less than 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared, like something really low.
And is there
Um,
anything like that on the market right now? Like none of the major unit.
no, none of the major,
Everybody's
but you can find some really low powered ones on Amazon and things like that. So, but the ones that biohackers usually talk about, like Alex Fergus and Ben Greenfield and Dave Asprey, the bigger panels that are pretty substantial, those usually have enough power.
Yeah.
So it's really just a debate of how much
Hmm.
within that range, and seeing how that goes. But overall, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't matter who I talk to. Most people enjoy the red light therapy panels. So it doesn't matter if you get it from me or you get it from another major company, like most people are happy with what they purchase. Red light therapy like feels really good. It's very intuitive. Like once you start using it, like a lot of people say, okay, how I just bought your product. How do I use it? I
Yeah.
say, get started with 20 minutes a day just on one spot, to try to target something that you're interested in working on, and just get started with that, and then kind of go up or down from there and see how you feel. And usually people can work it into the routine. If you're going to sit at a desk, you can prop it on the chair behind you and use it that way, or you can use it on the face in the morning to kind of wake you up, give you some energy, as well as get the facial benefits as well. So yeah, really, it's just like getting down to the nitty gritty of dosage and doing things right. Like that's kind of the big differential for me, is like, do you want something that's a little bit more science based and really measured out, or do you want something that's got a lot of hype and affiliates and things around, and a lot of marketing attached to it as well. So, and I just worry about, we've gone pretty far away from what I read in the literature with, like I said, measuring things with the right way, with properly calibrated measurements. And so all the consumer products, we can't correlate to the science. We can't really
The
correlate to
literature.
the science, yeah, to the literature, because the measurements are off and things like that.
Right. So you just touched on power, which obviously is a big factor, and
Mhm.
people, and one of the things that I wanted to address is there's a lot of confusion. So people already own units. Some
Yeah,
people. You've got two groups of people who might be watching this. People
yeah.
who have been paralyzed on the sidelines watching, because there's been a lot of feather and fur flying lately, because there's a lot of,
Mhm.
unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of conflict in the space of manufacturing these devices, and hopefully
Yeah,
that'll settle down pretty soon.
yeah.
So you've got people on the sidelines going, I don't know what to buy. And then you've got other people like me, for example, who may have jumped into the market early, who now who
Mhm.
own a device, and you're not going to toss it out. So interesting thing on the power. So if I had a device, let's say, that was less powerful than another one, then I would just extend my time. And
Yeah,
if I
yeah,
had
and
a device that delivers
yeah,
more punch, I
right,
might shorten my time, or could I move away? Could I step
exactly.
away from it to modulate the impact?
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the key things, is you can kind of use the distance, and a proper manufacturer will tell you, kind of, okay, if you're 3 inches away, 6 inches away, 12 inches away, what's the intensity at those different levels? And then yeah,
Okay.
you can control essentially the intensity your body feels, by modulating your distance away from the panel. So that's a good technique. So that kind of generally, people will say, oh, if you want to be a little bit further away, that's better for superficial type things for your skin. If you're going to be a little bit closer, that'll be a shorter treatment, and maybe it'll target a little bit deeper into the skin, into the body.
Okay.
um, but it really depends on what your protocols are, what you're trying to treat, all these different
So in
factors
terms
into
of,
it.
okay, so I want to touch on a couple of things. There's all the
Yeah.
different metrics that you looked at in your research
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
I'd love to touch on a little bit, but
sure.
now also there's protocols. So if somebody was, because I've been, I've used red light and near infrared light. Like I've been using photobiomodulation on and on for the last couple of years. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
There got a point where I got so confused. I just stepped away from the whole thing. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. So I'm just not doing it
Mhm.
for a while. And now I'm kind of back at it.
Mhm.
So, and I've had clients who've, we've talked about it and they kind of stepped up, they bought their device. And anecdotally, I would say that people have definitely experienced benefits
Yeah.
from, one woman who had eczema. She'd kind of felt we'd done it all, right? We'd done the diet, the gut healing, we'd done all the stuff, and she still had this persistent eczema. And it didn't take long, I'm not going to lie, for it
Yeah.
to kind of resolve with red. It seemed to be the last piece that she was missing.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you get people who might feel like for me, like I used it daily for, I don't know, maybe it was 3 weeks or so. And I mean, I lost a couple of pounds, and the only way
Mhm.
I could really explain it was that it was just my inflammation had kind of dropped.
Yeah.
It seemed to have had a systemic anti-inflammatory benefit for me.
Mhm.
So I guess one thing is, how do people figure out the protocol for whatever it is that ails them, or that they're trying to help themselves with? And also, I'd love to talk about is there a time of day that's better or worse? Is there a time
Yeah.
of day when you wouldn't use your red light device?
Right.
That
Right.
kind of stuff. So what do
Yeah,
you
I mean, yeah, for different protocols, like it really depends. Like if you have target spots of pain or inflammation, or if you're just doing it for kind of anti-aging type things, like you're going to target obviously the point where you want to target. There's also like kind of neuroprotective benefits for the brain or things like that. So there's so many things you can get started. There's thousands of studies on PubMed, or you can look at different review articles that different influencers have put out over the years, like Alex Fergus and Dave Asprey and all these different bloggers. And a lot of times they'll do a summary of what are some really good ideas to use red light therapy for, and where they can apply it. But then it's kind of still in the realm of biohacking. That's why it's a perfect product for biohackers. You still need to kind of tune it to your own usage and your own design, and say, okay, yeah, you're going to start with the manufacturer's protocol. Like if I'm a manufacturer and I tell you, okay, get started 20 minutes a day on your target region, and then see how it goes. Or if someone's really sensitive to light, maybe start for 5 minutes a day, and then build your way up over the course of a week or two up to that 20 minutes. So if it's your first time using red light therapy and you don't know how powerful it's going to be for you, then you might want to work your way up. And then you want to kind of dial it in. Okay, what's a good time to fit it in? What's a good time around my work schedule? What's time that feels right? And as you mentioned, is there a time of day that's optimal? It seems like there's a lot of anecdotal kind of thoughts that, okay, if you do it early in the morning or more in the evening, it has a kind of a better effect, especially because you're kind of doing it in line with your circadian rhythm.
Exactly.
Where the sun is rising or setting, the sun is actually emitting to us more of a spectrum of red and near infrared during those times of day. And so that's when your body might be more attuned to receiving it, and when it might feel kind of more natural to use, kind of like the red of the setting sun or a fireplace or something like that, to help kind of simulate that kind of response. And it can have kind of even like a restful kind of response. A lot of my users will use it on the chest or use it on the body at night, and it'll help them with their sleep and help them fall asleep. I think because it's actually stimulating some melatonin production with the red light therapy.
Oh, interesting.
But it's kind of it could be a kind of a double-edged sword. Some people say too much red light could be kind of stimulatory at night. If you have a high dose. So it really depends on your body and how you respond to it. If you're doing it at night or something like that. But generally I hear very positive responses. But every once in a while you could have someone that says, oh no, it actually kind of stimulates me and keeps me up. So it's again something to test out for yourself.
Yeah. Well, there's a piece of bioindividuality to literally any biohack you can think of, right?
Yeah.
Like and we can never get away from that. There's no, I mean, there's going to be your general rules of thumb, and it makes infinite sense to me that the times of day when you would naturally be exposed to more red light would make the most sense.
Hmm.
And using it in the evening around the time that the sun would be setting would be great, as long as you're not then going to go plant yourself in front of the TV and blast your eyeballs with blue light
Right. Exactly.
and completely knock it out. Um,
Hmm.
but that dose response, that personal response that you're going to get to a device or
Hmm.
this type of therapy is going to vary greatly from person to person. I mean, look, there's going to be even some genetics that might come into play there. Like there's some people are make more melatonin than others, or their pathways are more upregulated or downregulated. Maybe this can play a role in helping
Right.
to rebalance that stuff. We don't know,
Yeah.
but I mean, because in terms of melatonin, so actually let me ask you another question. The melatonin question is, that's not a quantified benefit, it's
Right.
anecdotal.
It's anecdotal. I have read some research that if you, kind of like if you target certain organs like the thymus, like that's right behind the sternum, that I referenced a study in one of my Instagram posts like almost a year ago that it's called like extra pineal melatonin production, that red light therapy can help stimulate melatonin production in your organs and your glands and thymus.
Oh,
And so it does have that kind of hormonal kind of response to it.
well,
And so
that's an
there
interesting
are,
thing these days. Yeah.
yeah. So there's, I mean, that's the thing. It's you can look up red light therapy and X on PubMed, on clinical research, and you can find all kinds of interesting studies on such a range of things because it's so foundational of improving our cellular function, improving our mitochondrial function,
Mhm.
that it can affect everything from the brain to your performance to recovery to just so many different things. And that's why every year there's more and more studies coming out over red light therapy. So it's very exciting time. Yeah.
No kidding. So when you talk about the thymus gland, I mean, you just bring up something interesting. I mean, we're here in this world of, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know who'll be watching this in 5 years, but here we are in COVID-19 doing our social distancing thing.
Yeah.
So when you talk about it possibly having a stimulatory effect on the thymus gland, we don't necessarily think of melatonin secretion as the first thing we think of with the thymus
Right.
gland. We think of it more from an immunity perspective. So is there any chance that, and we know also the thymus gland kind of involutes as we age, and
Hmm.
um, so is there, have you come across research that talks about how red light therapy may be helpful in terms of supporting a healthy immune system in people as they get older, kind of thing? So
Right.
not saying that you should go, not saying it's going to cure anything,
Hmm.
but is there any research that might point to that as a benefit as well?
Yeah, I would think so. I haven't seen any specific kind of disease-related studies, but just in the
It's
way
like
it
general
supports.
immune, though. I'm
Right. It supports the body on kind of a systemic level as well. Like there's a lot of really interesting studies, and you could aim red light therapy at the tibia of a mouse, and it gives them neuroprotective effects. Like so, you could aim
on
it
your
at their
tibia.
leg. Yeah, so there's
Okay.
systemic because it gets into your bloodstream, it gets into your body. So there was another study where they had a cut on one side on both arms, but they only treated one arm, and the cut on the opposite arm was also healing faster than the
Wow.
control group that so that there's all these systemic benefits. It's getting into your body, so no matter where you treat, and a lot of people say, oh, I need this big full body device to
That's such an
saturate your
interesting point.
body.
Yeah.
And I've always said, well, just look at the systemic effects. A lot of times red light therapy barely even penetrates into the brain. Like if you're trying to aim it through the forehead, you've got
Mhm.
skin blocking it and you've got bone blocking it, and a small percentage might ever reach the brain. But they're saying the systemic effects of just getting into the bloodstream around your head, or they've got the devices that you go up your nose,
Oh yeah, the
and
violet. Yeah.
yeah, like the vilate, and so those go up the nose, and they say, okay, yeah, we're aiming it kind of at the base of your skull, but we're also irradiating the blood vessels in your nose, and your nose is glowing like Rudolph.
Yeah.
But it's getting into your bloodstream and helping out on a systemic level. So I think really, yeah, there's a lot of
That is
excitement
so
around that. And
fascinating. It's also
yeah,
like
yeah.
the
So
human charger, like the
mhm,
Valkey device, that is the
yeah,
opposite end of the spectrum, right? So it's a
yeah,
device to help people stay awake or beat jet lag or beat
mhm,
seasonal affective disorder. And it's actually shining bright white light into your
yeah,
ears that's hitting those photoreceptors in your brain
mhm,
through the ear canal. So
right.
and getting those benefits that way. So it is, and I mean, the whole issue of light and the different, how different spectrums can be harnessed for different benefits
Yeah, yeah.
is a
So
pretty fascinating thing. Anyway, yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. So yeah, that's an exciting thing. So I always say, you can get started with red light therapy, and you could have kind of a full body response without necessarily having to saturate your whole body, unless you have a specific reason to do a full body kind of light system.
Or you happen
Um,
to own it.
yeah, you could no, you could own it and use it for general wellness,
Yeah.
and that's great too, just to have it.
So in other words, so somebody, so you don't have to have your, like, you don't need to do your front and then your back and then your side. Like, basically what you're saying is, unless you've got a specific, and even then you're likely to get the benefits no matter what. I mean,
Yeah.
you can do a
Well,
spot
I mean, it
if you
really,
want to,
yeah,
but you don't need to.
yeah, it really depends on what you're going for. If you're just doing it for general wellness and you're not really going to notice a difference either way, you could split it up and say, okay, today I'm going to do my front, tomorrow I'll do my back, and
Right.
then the next day. And because there's also kind of a cumulative response as well, is
Mm-hmm.
that red light therapy stays in your body for, some say up to 48 hours. So that's why a lot of protocols, they space out the treatments to be every other day or every couple days or just twice a week, because they know you don't have to do it every day. You can kind of space it out. So if you're doing your front, so that's how I tell people, like, you don't have to sit with my panel and try to do a full body thing and spend all day try to do it with a
Over
smaller
here, over
panel.
there.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, well, one day you can do one part, and the next day you do another side, and then you kind of keep rotating through.
Kind
So
of like
that way you don't
your
have to
workouts.
feel,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Chest day,
But
leg day.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can do legs one day, chest one day, things like that. So there's still a lot of flexibility. So you don't have to be so rigid, like you kind of implied. So many manufacturers say, oh yeah, you gotta stand in front of our light for 20 minutes like a rotisserie chicken and kind of just keep rotating around and make sure you get that full body response. And I'm like, there's literally no study that says people are standing and walking around in circles in front of a red light.
Right.
So I don't
Little
see,
mice being,
yeah,
a little rotation.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't see the pair, like there's just a lot of extrapolation and marketing going on of like what's really practical. So I'm just trying to bring some logic back into this and say,
Nice.
okay, we don't have to keep overdoing things, like, and just, if you feel great doing it that way, then keep doing it. I don't want people to stop, but just to think things through and be open to try different approaches.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that very much, Andrew.
Yeah, yeah,
A little
for
bit of
sure.
clarity. Okay, so oh, actually, I know what I wanted to ask you. So around workouts, I know that there's some of the people using this thing, red light therapy, will
Hmm.
say that they like to use it before workout because they feel it
Yeah,
gives them like an energy surge. But then another one of the big features of red light therapy is recovery, right?
yeah.
We talk about recovery all the time. So is there, again, is this kind of, it just depends on what you're looking for, or people should just try it at different times and see when they get the best benefit, or maybe do a 5 minutes before a workout and then later in the day do the recovery
Yeah.
with it? What's your,
Yeah, I think, yeah, you've hit it. It's kind of like you got to be open to trying different things and looking, asking people how they do their protocols. It seems like the research is leaning towards doing it afterwards if you want to maximize your recovery
yeah,
to
that's
to
how
to
I
do
use
it.
mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where the science is leaning towards it. But again, I'm not too picky. If you can fit it in before and that's your time to do it,
Just get in
and
front of
you're
the
doing it,
daylight.
yeah, and you're doing it consistently and it feels good, then you gotta just do what works for you, because you can't always say, oh, I'm gonna go to the gym and then go home and do red light and then go back out to work or whatever.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way. So
It's like
yeah,
anything else,
typically,
right? if you can fit
Yeah.
it in that day, I mean, if you go to the gym in the morning and then you do your red light in the evening at the appropriate time, you're going to get the benefit from it.
Yeah.
It's not like moving it away from the workout's going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about it. So you did, you know what, I think you wrote one of the best articles where a couple of years ago, a few years ago now, where you compared a bunch of different panels. And I feel like at that time, yours wasn't included in that. So were you even making your own panels at the time? Or you just left
Um,
it in order to be
well,
more?
there was Alex Fergus had written an article, and then actually I think I was featured in Thaddeus Owen's article on Primal Hacker. I think I got into that article a couple months after he wrote it because I had just launched my product, and yeah, he got me into the article, and he was comparing the Juve and the Red Juvenator, um, and he was comparing it to Sauna Space, but like I said, it's more of a heat.
This is a different animal, right? Like,
Yeah, that's more of a heat lamp, but he still had it in the same article. And then eventually he added me in as kind of a third LED panel option. And the one thing is that when I launched my panel, over 2 years ago, there were a lot of concerns about EMFs and things like that,
yeah.
especially circulating that. And his article kind of brought up a lot of that.
Like he's big on that whole EMF thing, yeah.
Yeah, and he was one of the first people to publish results on measuring EMFs of different panels, and so that created a lot of controversy and a lot of concerns.
Ever gotten one of these from him?
No, the bags. Yeah, I get a lot. Actually, a lot of my products come in a. It's kind of like this, but it's with foil. They come in anti-static bags, but a lot of my products come with. Well, if they come in with the foil, then it's called a Faraday bag. It's a very simple anti-static foil bag, and it's used to protect electronics from static or electric shock because it'll destroy the components. But if you get a big enough bag, you can slip phones in there and electronics in there, and it'll block the EMFs, and they're really cheap.
I have a funny story about this thing. I had it, and my phone was in my purse, and I put my car key in here. And my car is a wireless entry, no key to start the car.
Oh,
and
you're probably freaking out.
My key on me because I go to start the car and it starts.
Yeah.
And my car wouldn't start. And I flipped out. I'm like, oh my God, why won't my car start? And my key was in here. It had literally blocked the signal from the key to the car. So
wow.
Low tech solution, a high tech problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, you can get foil bags, and that's what he wouldn't add me to his review until I lowered the EMFs on my product, because when my first batch came out, he wasn't happy with the EMF on it, and I was like, I thought it was kind of unfair because my EMF was the same as one of my competitors, so I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. But anyway, so I did it because it was and again. What?
He forced you to up your game.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the key is, and that's why I started my business, was to create more competition and try to not only lower prices, but like I said, bring more transparency and bring more quality to the industry. So I was like, okay, so I talked to some electrical engineers I knew, and we came up with a simple fix to retrofit all our panels with the EMF reduction, and measured it. I sent a sample to Thaddeus to measure, and he was impressed. And so he added me to that review and showed like a significant drop. Like we dropped it like 7 times lower. And so it was really great. And like I told the electrical engineer that gave me the tip, I was like, yeah, we did. This is amazing. Like, we reduced the EMF so much. And he was not even impressed. He was like, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. Like, that's normal. Because
it's not even that big a deal.
Yeah, because there's a lot of like weird stuff going on where you see a lot of people say, oh yeah, we have all these solutions for EMF, but I'm like, electrical engineers and stuff have been trained about EMF for years, and like I said, simple Faraday bags have come from the industry for years. It's just that a lot of electrical engineers are also trained to reduce product cost, and the way they reduce product costs is having less components and not including certain things like EMF shielding, because they don't know that there's a biological impact to begin with.
Right.
You know, but if you can re-educate the engineers and say, hey, these are important things to watch out for, they'll be open to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they don't want to hurt
Sure.
people.
Well, and how much
You know,
cost does it really add? Like, does
no,
it
it
really
should
impact the
be
cost of your units?
just minimal. You know, it's just a minimal
Yeah.
difference. And I kept all my prices the same when I added that in. And you know, so but it just made a huge difference. And that's, you know, kind of when, you know, his platform as well as my platform, trying to re-educate people about looking for EMFs. And, you know, unfortunately, you've seen now there's analysis paralysis where there's tons of companies that are coming out flooding the market. Back when I launched, yeah, there was only like 2 or 3 main players, including me. And now there's like every month I could see like a new company popping out of nowhere. um, so you do need to be much more diligent about, you know, are they producing EMF? Are they measuring it properly? Are they, you know, disclosing you this information? And if not, why not? And you know, but there's still a lot of confusion because I can tell people the EMF numbers for my product, and then they'll be like, I don't even know if that's good or bad. Like, you know, I mean, a lot
Right.
of people
Right.
don't know that, and because there's no, you know, definitive statement. It's kind of like this entire um, conversation we've had about red light therapy. You could apply to EMF, where sometimes you can apply EMF in a therapeutic manner, like PEMF, which
Mm-hmm.
uses pulses of magnetic frequencies and different, you know, different pulses and powers to help stimulate healing and stimulate bone healing and wound healing and inflammation and all these great things. But if you're in a constant environment of low dose EMF from your house and your appliances and your Wi-Fi, that's what you need to start looking out for. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. If you sit outside and lay under the sun all day and you get sunburnt, that's not going to be a big surprise. If you sit all day next to something that's high EMF, that's probably not a good idea either. So
Right.
it's really just controlling your environment. If you can take these steps to reduce the EMFs that you're exposed to and use things more appropriately, then that's the key is what to look out for.
Well, interestingly enough, 2 minutes before we started, I got a note. I had reached out to Thaddeus because he and I were both in that same class, that first
Mm-hmm.
Bulletproof
Yeah,
Human Potential Coach class, and he's agreed to do an interview with me. So I'm sure we'll be
awesome.
talking about EMF a
Oh,
lot.
of course. Yeah, no, yeah, it's good.
That's his thing, EMF and light.
Mhm.
So okay, so there's another so I guess the question is, how do people know that a company is being truthful about, you know, what questions should they ask a company about how are you measuring your EMF, or
Yeah,
how do they do that work for themselves, kind of thing? I mean, there's resources, obviously. So there's the
yeah,
article that Alex has published. There's articles
hmm
you've published. I'm pretty sure Thaddeus on Primal Hacker,
yeah.
you
He's got
that
some
first article,
videos and
probably
the
done more.
articles. Yep. hmm
Um, but then, so I guess it's really doing that research. That's the best
Yeah,
way to do it, short of running around buying a bunch of stuff and then thinking you're going to return it, which never really ends
yeah.
well. Um,
Right. And that's the kind of thing. It's like that's the value that I like to think I add. Is a Gemba is actually a Japanese word that I learned in manufacturing engineering. It means the place where value is created.
oh, nice.
And yeah, so it's kind of actually literally it refers to like the manufacturing floor. That's where the work is being done and things are being put together. And but you know, I wanted to create value by, you know, taking these professional grade measurements and making them transparent, and that's the kind of value that I bring. If someone's just kind of importing some cheap LEDs and reselling them without really taking those extra steps of proper measurements, then it's kind of like, well, what value are they adding? So, you know, unfortunately, it's like you know, I can measure my own products and I can send them out to labs, but you have to still take my word for it of what I've measured and what I've done. And I have YouTube videos with my professional grade EMF tools and you know, some of my intensity measurement tools, and I can show you kind of live on
That's
YouTube to
amazing.
add that. Yeah, it's great. But on the same token, you know, I'm promoting my own product and you can't really trust me. So it's good if I can send products to a third party like Thaddeus or
Yeah.
Alex Fergus or some of these third party guys and have them measure it, because
Yeah.
I know they, you know, they take those steps and it's kind of out of my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And just to you know, separate my biases from how my measurement techniques might influence my results, hopefully these guys will take more steps to at least add that layer of separation
For
that,
sure.
they're
Well,
measuring
and I
things.
think you three guys in particular have done such a great job of educating people and,
Hmm.
not necessarily, I find, and what I really liked about Alex's article and even Thaddeus is just, here we got these devices and we had no
Yeah.
real expectations and we measured them. And, and I know that Alex has updated his results over the last
Yeah.
while. And I'm sure Thaddeus has done the same where, here's what we found. You can make your own decision, but I think, and even with you, I mean, although yes, you have skin in the game in the sense that you have a
Yeah.
panel on the market, you've still taken on a huge role of education, right?
Right.
Which I think has been a huge service to the space and the industry in general, never mind to individuals trying to make sense of
Yeah.
the whole thing. So there is one other big bad wolf here that we
Hmm.
haven't touched on yet today, and it's the one that, it's the one that gives me the most amount of dissonance. It's this whole issue of flicker, right?
Hmm.
So you've got power, you've got EMF shielding, and then this whole issue of the flicker that the lights are delivering. So
Yeah.
so I of course dutifully went and did the slow-mo video and saw
You did, yeah.
my panel, and I went, oh my god, how
Yeah.
because if I wear a sleep mask, then the wrinkles around my eyes aren't going to get helped, or maybe they
Exactly. Yeah.
systemically, but not really. So,
Hmm.
I am having these existential crises. So
Yeah.
talk to me about flicker. Does it affect so the questions I have is, does flicker affect everybody the same? Because listen, there's people that are far more sensitive to, EMF exposure, again, like any kinds of things than others. Is flicker going to affect everybody the same? Is there anything people can do to mitigate the flicker on their devices if they already have
Hmm.
one? I know that GembaRed's done a great job of, I don't know if you've knocked it out completely or
Yeah.
minimized it, but so talk to me about flicker.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing for simplicity purposes, like we knocked out as much flicker as possible, and that's what I go into deep in. I have a blog post, and then actually I wrote a guest blog post for Alex Fergus.
Okay.
Um, uh, and actually my guest blog post for Alex Fergus was just on flicker in general. So,
Oh, great.
especially back in like the 90s when a lot of light bulbs were being transferred over from incandescent to fluorescent. That's when we started, understanding more about the flicker and biology, because they went from incandescent bulbs, which do have a small amount of flicker. They have about up to like 10% flicker.
Yeah.
So an incandescent bulb has some flicker, but then they went to fluorescent bulbs, which
It's like
normally have about, yeah, they have like 35% flicker, and they have this horrible spectrum of blue light and things like that. So when they switched over, they noticed all these office workers were complaining about headaches, eye strain. There were studies about, poor productivity, about distraction. It can trigger migraines, nausea, dizziness, like all these things. And so that's when, a lot of this research came out, and I reference a lot of this, in my article for Alex, that they were researching this and starting to understand that lighting, especially, if you're exposed to it 8 hours a day at a workplace, or um, any kind of task lighting that you're doing an intricate task and you need to focus on what you're doing, you don't want flicker, because that creates kind of light artifacts. It confuses your brain. It makes it very hard to read, so you don't want to read under a flickering light. So all these things kind of affect it. Okay, so now we take it into the context of red light therapy, and we say, okay, you know what? It's probably not great if you're getting, flickering red lights into your eyes. Again, a lot of the similar kind of effects could happen that you have to watch out for if you're getting headaches or eye strain
Okay.
or
So really watch
dizziness.
see how you react.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. So you'll probably feel it. You'll probably have an inherent response. You might not even know what it is, because the flicker in most lights is purely invisible unless you use a slow motion camera. That's because it's probably flickering at 2 times your um, AC rate. So if you're on a 60 hertz in the US or Canada, then it's flickering at 120 hertz. And typically, the human brain can't really, it kind of fuses together the flickers, so your
Right.
brain doesn't, just
So it
sees it
kind of
as
tunes the
continuous.
edges and sees it as
Hmm.
one. Okay.
Yep, it sees it as continuous, but you have all these rapid eye movements called saccades or saccades or something, and basically you're doing your eyes are always kind of twitching a little bit, and that's where the flicker can kind of start to mess with your brain or give you headaches or confusion because your eyes are always kind of darting around a little bit, and so that again, so that's something to look out for, especially if you're buying essentially a full body panel that you're standing 6 inches away. There's obviously going to be some impact into your eyes. So you had referenced there's kind of, if you ask Dr. Hamblin, who's a big researcher on red light therapy,
Yeah.
if you ask him about flicker, he says it's probably not a big issue, right? Which is good, but essentially I think he's more referring to the context of a lot of times they're using uh, lasers or LED clusters kind of focused onto like the skin. So not, and a lot of times
Not in
the
your
research,
face.
it's not aiming right into your face. So it's kind of like a different context that it's probably not going to affect the overall benefits of red light therapy, just kind of essentially it modulates the intensity. So it's an interesting thing to look at, but it's still, you don't want it necessarily in your eyes and in your face.
Right.
So that I guess the bigger thing is, like, let's say you have a panel that's flickering. It's probably not flickering 100%, because that would be like kind of a full on off cycle. That would be a really low quality LED. And
Right.
like, I've had people ask me, oh, you can't ever use LEDs for health purposes because of all this flicker. And I've had to re-educate people and say, no, if you use high quality components, high quality drivers, that reduces the flicker. You can reduce it down to almost nil. So with LEDs, it really depends on the quality. You could have anywhere from 0% flicker to 100% flicker. So you don't know
So the
where
way
you're
you're
at.
modulating that is the input. It's how the electricity, how the power is coming in
Yeah,
the unit is what's
right. So basically, yeah, there's little modules inside the panel that convert AC to DC.
right.
So ideally, an LED runs on pure direct current, and that's a nice thing to think about. Except there's a ripple current that comes from the AC, depending on the quality of your driver and how it's designed. And so that ripple current is what gives you that fluctuation. That's the flicker. And then the IEEE is basically a body that said, they created a kind of a table that says, okay, here's kind of the percentages that we think are biggest concern. So there's a threshold. If you're above like 9% at 120 hertz, if you're higher flicker percentage than that, that's when you need to start worrying about,
And would that be
these flicker
visible to the
effects.
naked eye?
No, it wouldn't be visible. And it's hard to tell exactly the percentage if you're using a slow motion camera.
Mhm.
You'll see it, but you don't know what percentage is
No,
necessarily.
no.
So that's the thing. And like you said, if you've been using your panel for a couple of years and you haven't noticed anything, some people are more impacted by flicker than others. It's
Right.
just another kind of like EMS is the same thing. A lot of people don't ever experience EMF sensitivity. Uh,
Well, or
you
not to the
know,
same degree. I think that we're all affected by EMF, like at a physiological level, at a cellular level. But
yeah,
I think some people are the canaries in the coal mine, right? So
right.
they're
Well,
more
that's yeah. That
sensitive.
Yeah, and that's the argument I would say for flicker. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't notice and they might not feel it for years and years and years, but maybe it's slowly sensitizing you to become more sensitive to things like that. Or maybe it's slowly and insidiously doing something to you, but we don't know what.
Okay.
So it's the same.
Well,
So
here
you
we
could
are
say
again.
that about EMFs or flicker. It's really interesting because when you watch TV, especially the old style TVs, and those had a flicker rate to it. They put EEG on people's brains, and you can see your brain waves are syncing up to the flicker on the TV screen.
Wow.
And the summary, of that article I read was that, yeah, we're syncing up to the flicker frequencies around us, but amazingly, our brain isn't really impacted by it.
Well,
So
our
like,
brain adapts,
yeah.
right? Like,
So yeah, so like they're like, we don't really see, like, it seems like a really horrible concept to kind of impinge your brain with different frequencies, but it's actually, they don't notice anything. And that can lead into some really cool stuff with like Violet and with pulsing frequencies
Mm-hmm.
of you can pulse the red light therapy LED or laser at 10 hertz, and 10 hertz is kind of the alpha frequency for the brain. It's kind of like, you know, when you close your eyes and rest and relax, that's kind of the resting state for your brain.
Yeah.
So you can pulse 10 hertz frequency, and they show there's a lot of good studies for with brain health, and also just in general, because when you pulse things, you've also reduced kind of the heat effects from the red light if you have a high powered laser. So 10 hertz, and then 40 hertz is the gamma frequency. So they also study that for you know, Alzheimer's and helping people with brain type of things. So you can use, you know, the pulsing and frequencies and these flicker artifacts for a good purpose as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of like, you know, that's you know, just another thing we need to be mindful of, that it could affect your experience with red light therapy. And you know, it depends on your personal preference, your sensitivity, and that's why I think you know, again, companies should just be more transparent with that. If they have a certain level of percentage of flicker, they should be more open with that. Like, you know, I was kind of joking, you know, since I'm indoors more and playing video games, and half the video games I boot up and they say, hey, this game has flashing images that could, you know, result
Yeah.
in a photoepileptic events. And a lot of these came from, in the 90s, there was a TV show that caused all kinds of epileptic events in Japan. And so there's this warning on all these screens now. And I'm like, that should be a warning, like with high
The
flicker
flicker.
devices and panels. And it's just something to keep in mind. So like, I think I'm more sensitive to it. Like, you can look at my article for Alex of different ways to mitigate it. If you keep, you know, the windows open, and if you have low flicker lights in your room to offset the flicker that's going in your eyes, it kind of buffers it out. So if you have sunlight in the room while you're doing your red light therapy, if you're concerned about flicker, you have the windows open, you're doing it during the daytime, that buffers out
Oh,
the
nice.
flicker. Yeah, because
Okay.
you've got, you know, the sunlight is continuous, and just a steady stream of light, and typically very bright because it's especially got blue, so it can help offset that. So that's what they say. Even if you're indoors all the time, you're watching a lot of TV nowadays,
Oh God, yeah.
uh, you want to keep all the windows open, keep backlights for your TV and your different screens, so that way you don't get as much of the flicker effects. You know, even the content of your screen, if you're watching a dramatic movie with different light effects, you have to watch out for that. So, you know, so keeping light on, you can add distance, but then distance will
Well,
degrade
just
your
use the,
intensity,
yeah.
something like that. Or you could try using, you know, some darker glasses that might not, you know, you can use, there's kind of like green anti-laser glasses
What about a blue
that
light
can block
blocker?
out some of it. The
Would
blue, well, you can use a blue
blue
light
light blocker?
blocker for if to protect you against typical fluorescent or
Yeah,
LEDs,
but
but
it wouldn't help with the flicker from the
yeah, because it'll pass, all the red passes through
right,
the
right,
blue
right,
blocker.
right.
So
Okay.
yeah, so I think there's different ways, and it's not, yeah, it's not something to be overly concerned about. But I had one, I got a cheap panel online, and you know, I've done little tests of different panels over the years. I got one online, and actually I was treating my back with this cheap panel, and I could notice, you can notice it more in your peripheral vision, because like I said, when your eye does the rapid eye movement, you can notice the flicker. I could see the flicker from
Wow.
behind me in my peripheral, and it was really like
Distracting.
confusing. I was like, yeah, it was really distracting. I was like, what is that light that keeps flashing? I look over my shoulder and I look at it and it looks steady, and then I look back and I'm, you know, I'm reading, and then it starts again. I was like, wow, it's really confusing and distracting. But then I, you know, did the slow-mo, and I was like, oh, that's because of the flicker. But again, that one was up probably over 50% flicker. So that was pretty high. So
Okay.
again, it's all a
Okay,
spectrum.
so net, I mean, if for, and actually the one thing I wanted to say, because you mentioned something about the red light in the brain, did you ever see
Mhm.
that thing? I think it was a video. I don't know if it was on Facebook. I don't know where I saw it, but this older man who has, I think it's Parkinson's disease, who made
Yeah,
himself a bucket, like a
yeah,
hat filled with red light, or near like little red light
yeah,
bulbs in it, and has started this like brain bucket therapy for himself that has actually, I think the article was saying that they were moving into some kind of trials with it, that it seemed to be helping with his symptoms.
Yeah,
So
I read
did you
the
read that?
draft for that study too. Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's got a nice website. He's got a tutorial on how to make it. And yeah, it's really great. It's really interesting. And those are pretty low power LEDs because I was looking for those strip lights, and so I decided I couldn't find any online, so I decided to manufacture them myself. And so I'm
I
making
think I
red
have some of your strip lights.
660s. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm making these strip lights, and you can make a DIY project out of making a red hat. And yeah, the interesting thing is some of his hats are pure red, which don't necessarily penetrate all the way through the hair and through the brain,
Yeah.
but you still get systemic effects, you still get some heating effects. And I did notice when I built a headband out of them and I tried to
You
put it on
really?
my forehead. Yeah, it gets really hot because the strip lights are kind of an inefficient, like the way
Like
they're
when they're
designed is
losing a lot of
very
heat.
inefficient and it creates a lot of heat and I just couldn't tolerate the heat. So I was like, it's a good in theory, but it was creating too much heat because it uses a lot of essentially resistors to control the power out of it, and the resistors create a lot of heat. And
Well,
so
you
I
would
was
need
like,
one of those crown things, like you'd need one of those, like a gizmo you put on your like this is getting elaborate, one of those
yeah,
gizmos you put on your shoulders that holds it at a certain distance.
right. And then like some fans built into it to keep it cool, and like it would just be a whole mess. Yeah.
Yeah, a whole thing.
So I've thought about this too much. I'm like, that would be a
Yeah.
lot of effort for like
You
not
may as well
you
just
can
stand in front of
again,
your panel and
yeah,
get
you can
what you
just
get,
aim your panel at your face and
and you're good.
hope you're getting some results
Okay.
through there. Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I think we're coming up on time here. I want to make
Sure.
sure that we were, this has been some great information. I think that the net, like what's really interesting to me is, first of all, there's some really good options on the market. I know that your
Yeah.
device, there will be a day when I will get a new device and I'll be knocking
Sure.
on your door. But I know that your devices, like you've done such a great job of taking a hard look at all the different things that you can impact and mitigate, and on top of that you're bringing it in at such an incredibly reasonable price. Like it just, like finding that intersection between value and quality for people is,
Yeah.
I just don't know that there's that many companies that are so focused on that. I know that there's a couple. I mean, I've talked to somebody, I did an interview a couple of months ago with somebody else in the space. I think, his device is quite good. He hasn't necessarily, they haven't necessarily dialed in all the different things like you have. But
Yeah.
again, like you feel from certain people, like a certain openness and transparency and saying, look, we're doing what we can. Here's what we've
Hmm.
done. Here's what we can offer. And now it's up to people to kind of do the work and decide where they're going to put down their money. So,
Yeah.
thanks for all the research and everything that you've done to really, I feel, advance our knowledge and
Hmm.
understanding of the space. It's been,
Yeah, and like I said, hopefully it drives my competitors to see what I'm doing and try to emulate it. And
yeah,
sometimes they emulate it a little bit too much with just copy and pasting stuff from my website.
yeah,
But sometimes, so I have to keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, like, I do put this out there for competitors to see and try to up their game as well and try to offer,
yeah,
let's see if we can compete on a on a basis and keep driving this forward and make some really innovative products. There's so many, like we've mentioned, there's so many shapes and sizes, and you can wrap it around your head or there's so many different opportunities that I don't think there's a one size fits all. So that's why it's important to shop around and see what works best for people.
yeah, no kidding. And obviously where I am right now is all about the blue light because
Hmm.
I'm by a window and I'm
Yeah,
blue
yeah.
compared to you.
Hmm.
I think my lighting's better in the afternoon. I should be doing only afternoon interviews.
Yeah.
Anyway, so where can people find you? Tell us.
GembaRed.com. It's GEMBA red.com, and that's straightforward. You can find I've got I've got a GembaRed Instagram, so just at GembaRed. Find Instagram, Facebook. Again, like with my blog posts, I've got a YouTube. I've got Instagram posts. If you go back through, like I really dive deep into even every blog, every Instagram post I write should also just be like a full length blog because there's so much information I pack into every post.
Amazing.
Like it's just something, if people can go back through and read through, you'll really catch up and be, at my same level, because I try everything I learned, I just try to put it out there.
Okay,
Yeah. So
amazing.
yep.
And then you were generous enough to create a discount code for anybody who's
Yep.
watching this at any time.
Yep.
You tell us what that is. So if you use
It
this code,
is,
guys, you get 10% off.
yep, is longevity 10. So
Amazing. I
yep.
love that. Longevity 10. So you'll get 10% off and you'll support Andrew's work and get yourself an amazing panel in the process, which is pretty cool. And, one more thing, last thing before we go.
Sure.
Aside from photobiomodulation, what's the most important thing you think people should be doing? And especially these days where, supporting immunity and keeping our immune systems healthy is so important. What's the most important thing you think people should be doing right now?
I think having, like, what I found, like, especially, in the past couple of weeks of essentially being indoors and quarantined, is like having a routine, getting up, whatever, making your coffee, trying to have like that level of normalcy.
Yeah.
Get some movement in for sure. I think getting the movement in, because if I sit around too much, like, everything just kind of starts to seize up. And so yeah, so we find, like, there's so many opportunities online with free yoga and movement things and different aspects you can find online, or just do it yourself at home. Like, just try to get that movement in and get that routine going.
Amazing. All right. Well, Andrew, thank you again so much for your time today. This was great. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right.
Have a
Take
good
care.
one. Yep. Bye-bye.